All right, welcome to 1920s pop culture with Mr. Edmondson. And let's face it, nothing screams popular culture like Mr. Edmondson. All right, to get through this video, make sure you have the following, please. Your notebook with a blank page, something to write with, and of course, as always, your genuine historical curiosity. Don't be trying to fake that either. I can tell through the screen. I know when it's fake historical curiosity. Make sure it's genuine. Okay, here's the 5 terms that you're going to need to take some notes on. We'll cover a lot of things, but these are the big ones, right? Consumer culture, installment buying, Harlem Renaissance, Jazz Age, and mass media. All right, just real quick to set our stage. Oh yeah, by the way, at any point that you need to pause this video and write stuff down, be sure to do that. I will be here waiting for you. All right, to set the stage. Let's look at President Calvin Coolidge. There's going to be really 3 presidents that matter in the 20s. Warren Harding, who's going to die in office, which lets Coolidge become president. And Harding, really nice guy, very popular, good-looking fella, but his administration is pretty corrupt. So really that's, don't need to worry about him a whole lot for this stuff. Herbert Hoover will be at the end of the 1920s. He's important to us because he's an Iowan, or at least was born here. His presidency is remembered for the start of the Great Depression. So really in the middle we have Calvin Coolidge. And Coolidge is he's a unique cat. He's really super quiet. He's very, very conservative, very reserved. There's a story that a woman met him at a White House dinner, and her husband had sent her over, and she said to President Coolidge, "My husband bet me that I could get you to say more than 2 words." And President Coolidge looked at her and just said, "You lose." And that was Calvin Coolidge. The interesting thing about Coolidge is his number one focus is going to be business. And right there, the quote, "The business of America is business." So he's going to be very pro-business in his administration. So the first term we want to look at is installment buying. And this is something Americans are really historically great at. And that's buying something over a period of time. And really, that's buying on credit. So you could buy like a washing machine, which is down here in the bottom right, or a refrigerator, which is over here in the bottom left. You could buy those things, maybe put a down payment, a small amount of money down, take that baby home with you, and then over the course of several months or even years, make payments called installments. And that's why it's installment buying. You're just making an installment every month on paying off the product. And this is going to open up an entirely new a new form of, or new way of living for Americans. It's going to allow people to live above their means, which means that they can own more stuff than they really can afford. Believe me, I can't afford my house and my cars, but with credit I can. Like, I can make those monthly payments, but I can't own them outright because I don't have enough money. Okay, and that's the way the majority of Americans live today still. So when you take that idea of people owning more than they can afford, really, and then you add in all of the new products, you get this, this consumer culture, which is important to remember. That term, the consumer culture, is just that we're a culture now of purchasers, of people who buy stuff. Okay, here's some examples of some of the things that have, a few of the things that have exploded in the 1920s. You've got the stove top left, the waffle maker, electric tools, irons, toaster in the bottom left. I mean, it's all kinds of things that we take for granted today. Moving on, the next topic is the Harlem Renaissance. And this is fairly lengthy, but it's important, so just stay with me on this. Okay? Harlem is a neighborhood in New York City. Before the 1920s, before the 1910s even, it's going to be kind of a rundown district. But as time wears on and as African Americans migrate from the South, Harlem is going to explode in growth and in prosperity. And here you can kind of see a cool map. 1911, it's in the red. 1920 is in the blue, and 1930 is in the green. So you can see how much bigger it grew in, 20 years. It's really exploded. Some good street shots of Harlem. Really a vibrant community back in the 1920s and 1930s. Some of you may know of the Harlem Globetrotters. They're famous, basketball team that goes around and puts on exhibitions with all kinds of great stunts and tricks and that sort of thing. And they came out of the Harlem Renaissance. They were started in the 1920s, actually. Okay, so what starts the Harlem Renaissance, as I mentioned earlier, it's the Great Migration. It's hundreds of thousands of African Americans moved from the South to the North. They're looking for better jobs, higher wages, less discrimination. There's also going to be this growing African American middle class. They're going to develop because despite all the discrimination, African Americans are going to become better educated. They're going to have more employment opportunities, and they're going to be able to make more money, which means they can now buy cars and things, things that the white middle class is also enjoying at this time. Here's our old friend W.E.B. Du Bois, who's kind of at the heart of everything African American between the Civil War and World War II, really. He, of course, weighs in on this, and he thinks that this Harlem Renaissance, which is going to include a lot of artists and authors and musicians and those kinds of folks, that the things that they're creating are going to help combat racial prejudice. That when everyone in the world sees how talented African Americans are, that they will start getting more and more respect and more equality. And he's going to be a proponent of holding up these examples. For example, he's going to come up with the idea of the talented 10th. And this is the idea that the top 10% of African Americans who are artistically inclined, have some sort of natural talent as an artist or a writer or a musician, that they should be granted absolute equality with whites right now, and they should be the leaders kind of African Americans, while the rest of the black masses, the other 90%, should be given technical training so they can do specific jobs and help raise African Americans out of obscurity or out of discrimination. Some more causes for the Harlem Renaissance will be like the Red Summer of 1919, when we have race riots all over the United States, primarily in northern cities. The KKK has been increasing its membership during this time. There's just a lot of bloodshed and a lot of racial strife. So African Americans are going to turn to Harlem and as their own community where they have some safety and some security and the ability to produce their artistic talents. Here's an excellent poem by Claude McKay called "If We Must Die," and it's kind of a call to arms for African Americans. Like, if they're going to discriminate us, let us fight back, essentially what it is. So I would highly encourage you to pause this and maybe read through it. It's a really powerful poem. The impact of the Harlem Renaissance is it's a lot of different things, but according to these pictures, you can see that this part of New York City is transformed from really kind of a rundown slum neighborhood into this thriving middle class community, and then the pictures do a good job of showing that. It's now the streets are cleaned up, there's new housing built, and there's money and businesses and those kinds of things in Harlem during this time. There's also this incredible surge in art and music and literature from African American artists, from musicians, from painters, from writers. They're fairly legendary. And blacks see this, African Americans see this as kind of creating their own new cultural identity. Not that they're subservient to whites anymore, and not that they're relegated to second-class citizens, but that they have their own culture that's just as valuable and just as good as white culture. Whites, however, will see it as just another new exotic or trendy form of entertainment, and not necessarily as the artistic movement that really it truly is. Modern artists will also look to make their art new by looking at the new Negro arts movement, and that's kind of what at the time they call the art that's coming out of Harlem Renaissance. You can kind of see just the images in the art and how it's a very modern look, and this will dominate in the 1930s and 1940s, and this is primarily led by African American artists. So the Harlem Renaissance is really this cultural dawn for African Americans, and it's centered in Harlem, New York. So make sure you've got that part down. And moving on to culture of the Roaring '20s, and really what we're looking at here is things that tie us together. Okay, and we're looking at mass media. So here's our definition: it's any of the means of communication, such as radio or newspapers, that reach very large numbers of people. Today, certainly TV is mass media. The internet is mass media, especially YouTube channels, those kinds of things. anything that gets a message to just huge groups of people is mass media. And in the 1920s, we will see this explosion of movies and radio, and newspapers have always been pretty big, but phonographs, those records, I mean, those kinds of things are really tying us all together. And really, mass media is what stitches the fabric of America together. And this means that people from all parts of the country can have similar experiences. So kids like you living in Ankeny, Iowa, can go down to the movie house in Des Moines, because I'm not sure Ankeny had one in the 1920s, but they can go to Des Moines and go to the movie house and watch a movie, the exact same movie that kids in Los Angeles are watching, or the kids in New York City are watching. You can buy records and listen to the same songs sung by the same artists as kids in Florida are hearing. So this is what gives us kind of a common experience. And mass media really plays a huge part in drawing America together in the 1920s. Of the Jazz Age, the Jazz Age is kind of one of these terms that we use a lot, and really it started out as just a label for the music of the 1920s, because jazz is going to become really popular. It's going to come up from New Orleans. It's invented in New Orleans around 1900, and then as African Americans migrate to the north, they're going to bring jazz with them, and it will catch on in northern cities as well. Today, the Jazz Age is also, it refers to writers and just the 1920s in general, speakeasies and flappers and all of this stuff. But really, for the Jazz Age, we want to focus just on the musicians themselves. A few of the really well-known, prominent ones: Louis Armstrong, maybe the greatest jazz musician of all time. He was technically great, spontaneous, very quick and inventive, and he's still a legend today. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard at least his name. Duke Ellington is very, very similar. He brings a sophistication to jazz that the genre has not seen before. He actually led an orchestra. He thought of himself more of a composer, a musical writer, than an actual performer. And George Gershwin, George and Ira Gershwin were brothers that were composers. But George Gershwin himself is one of the first people to actually kind of take jazz and fuse it with traditional concert music, which is going to make it really popular. Rhapsody in Blue and An American in Paris are very, very well-known, popular songs from the 1920s. All right, so that kind of wraps up our pop culture. There's a lot more to it than that, guys. I can't tell you how important the 1920s are for understanding American history, especially if you look around today. If you look around 2016 and you see kind of what Americans are doing and what we're focused on, you have a lot of that in the 1920s, a lot of the same stuff. You have huge musical celebrities. You have huge movie stars. You have fads. You have all of these things, the same stuff that we have going on today, we had in the 1920s. And really, the 1920s are the first time that we see this. So if you need to review these terms, go back through the video and find them. Make sure you have good notes on that so that when you take the quiz at the end of this chapter, you'll be in good shape. Thanks for watching.